Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Sports Lab. Today we're putting on our lab coats to break down one of the most iconic, feared, and scientifically brutal systems in all of combat sports, the peekaboo style of boxing perfected by the one and only Iron Mike Tyson. Now, think about this for a second. How did a 5'10" heavyweight with a 71-inch reach off and giving up half a foot in height and nearly a foot in reach to his opponents become the most devastating puncher the sport has ever seen? It wasn't just raw power, it was a system, a blueprint. Before we get into the analysis, if you're a fan of the in-depth side of sports, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps us continue bringing these stories to you. And while you're at it, leave a comment below with a game or play you think we should break down next. We read every single one. Alright, let's get into the game film. To truly understand the peekaboo, you can't start with Mike Tyson. You have to start with the architect, the puppet master, the brilliant and obsessive boxing mind of Cus D'Amato. What you have to realize is that peekaboo isn't just a style in the way that being a brawler or an outboxer is a style. It's a complete, holistic operating system for a fighter. It's a philosophy of combat born from a single, fundamental problem Cus was obsessed with solving. How does the smaller man beat the bigger man? In a sport where height and reach are king, Cus looked at the conventional wisdom and decided to flip it entirely on its head. He saw that a shorter fighter's lower center of gravity, their compact frame, their naturally tighter turning radius, these weren't disadvantaged. In his mind, they were the very tools you could use to dismantle a taller, rangier opponent. The entire D'Amato blueprint is built around this core concept, neutralizing the jab and closing the distance safely. Think about it. The primary weapon of a tall fighter is the jab. It's a rangefinder, a barrier, a point scorer, and a setup for the power shots. If you can take away the jab, you take away their entire game. The peekaboo system is engineered from the ground up to do exactly that. It's a method of turning the defensive liability being in range of the jab into an offensive opportunity. Every piece of the system, from the gloves on the cheeks to the constant head movement to the explosive footwork, is a cog in this anti-jab, distance-closing machine. Cus D'Amato wasn't just teaching his fighters how to punch. He was teaching them a new form of physics, a new geometry of the ring where the shortest distance between the points was a violent bobbing-weaving line that led straight to the opponent's chin. Now, you can see the proof of concept long before Tyson ever laced up a pair of gloves. Look at Cus's first heavyweight champion, Floyd Patterson. Patterson was small for a heavyweight, even in his era, standing at just 6 feet tall. When he fought the much taller Archie Moore for the vacant title, you can see the early DNA of the peekaboo. You'll see Patterson using that high guard, that bobbing movement, and most famously, that leaping left hook, what Cus called a gazelle punch, to close the distance and land devastating shots on a bigger man. Jose Torres, another D'Amato champion at light heavyweight, was another practitioner, but Tyson was a magnum opus. He was the perfect physical and psychological specimen to execute the system to its most terrifying potential. He had the natural explosive athleticism, the freakish power, and under Cus's guidance, the obsessive discipline to drill the movements until they were as natural as breathing. This brings us to a common misconception about the peekaboo style, and it's one we have to dismantle right from the start. Most people see a young Mike Tyson storming across the ring and they think wild aggression. They see a brawler, a berserker, an offensive whirlwind. But that's only seeing the effect, not the cause. The counter-argument, and the one we're going to prove over this breakdown, is that the peekaboo is, at its core, a defensive system. It is a philosophy of supreme, almost impenetrable defense that creates the illusion of reckless offense, the constant pressure, the bobbing and weaving, the relentless forward movement. It's all designed to make the opponent miss. It's about creating chaos for your opponent while maintaining perfect structure and calm for yourself. It's about drawing their fire, making them punch at a target that's no longer there, and then capitalizing on the openings they create in their own frustration. The knockouts are the grand finale, but the real genius of the system is in the setup. It's a science of evasion. Cus D'Amato famously said, "The hero and the coward both feel the same thing, but the hero uses his fear, projecting it onto his opponent, while the coward runs." The peekaboo style is the physical manifestation of that idea. It is a way to walk through your own fear, to get so close to the fire that your opponent is the one who gets burned. It's a system designed not just to win a fight, but to break an opponent's will by making them feel utterly helpless against an unstoppable, ever-advancing and untouchable force. So, if we agree that this system is a defensive fortress designed to solve the problem of reach, the first brick in that fortress, the very foundation of the entire structure, is the stance. And if you pull up any footage of a prime Mike Tyson, the first thing you'll notice is that his stance looks, well, wrong. It breaks a lot of the fundamental rules you learn in a conventional boxing gym. A traditional orthodox stance is more bladed. Your lead shoulder points directly at the opponent. Your feet are roughly shoulder width apart, and your weight is either centered or slightly on your back foot. This is designed for two things: to create the longest possible path for your jab and to make it easy to push off that back foot to escape danger. It's a stance built for linear, in and out movement. Now, look at Tyson. It's a completely different animal. His feet are closer together, and his body is much more squared up to his opponent. He isn't presenting just his shoulder, he's presenting more of his torso. But the most crucial, most unorthodox element is the weight distribution. You'll see that his weight is heavily biased towards his front foot, his lead leg. His knees are bent in a deep crouch, almost like a wrestler's stance. He looks like a compressed, coiled spring, and that's exactly what he is. This stance isn't designed for staying at a safe distance. It's engineered for one purpose: explosive, multi-directional movement into the danger zone. Let's break down the genius of this. First, the squared up posture. By not being fully bladed, you sacrifice a little bit of reach on your jab, but you gain something far more valuable for this system: the ability to generate immense power with both hands from a much shorter distance. When you're squared up, your hips are already in a more neutral position, allowing you to rotate with maximum velocity in either direction. A devastating right hand or a devastating left hook can be launched with almost identical and minimal telegraphing. You don't have to rotate your whole body around to get the rear hand into play. Second, and this is the real secret sauce, is that front foot weight distribution. It seems insane, right? Every coach will tell you not to lean over your front foot because you can be easily knocked off balance and you can't retreat quickly. But Cus D'Amato understood that the goal of this system isn't to retreat. It's to advance and evade simultaneously. By loading that front leg, you're creating a launch pad. From that position, Tyson could spring forward into a punch, dart to his left, or pivot to his right with a level of explosiveness that was simply impossible from a traditional stance. The traditional stance is great for moving backward. The peekaboo stance is built for moving everywhere else. It's the stance of a predator stalking its prey, always on the verge of pouncing, never on its heels. The deep knee bend completes the circuit, lowering his center of gravity to make him a smaller target and engaging his powerful legs, the true source of his power, which we'll get into later. A perfect example of this is the opening bell of his title fight against Trevor Berbick. Go watch it. The moment the bell rings, Berbick comes out in a fairly standard, upright heavyweight stance. He's looking to establish his jab to control the distance. Tyson, on the other hand, is already in that low, coiled crouch, bouncing on the balls of his feet with his weight forward. He doesn't take a step back. He immediately springs forward and to the side, slipping Berbick's initial jab and getting inside his punching range in a split second. Berbick, from his more static stance, has no answer. He's forced to retreat and reset, but Tyson is already there, coiled and ready to spring again. You can see in that very first exchange how the stance itself is an offensive weapon. It dictates the tempo and the geography of the fight from the first second. This brings us to the counter-argument that this stance is defensively flawed and leaves the fighter off balance. On the surface, it appears that way. If you were to just stand still in that position, yes, a good push could knock you over. But the key is that the peekaboo practitioner is never still. The balance isn't static, it's dynamic. It's the precarious, perfect balance of a sprinter in the starting blocks. They are technically off balance, but they're primed for maximum acceleration. The defensive security of the peekaboo stance doesn't come from being rooted to the spot. It comes from having the ability to move explosively in any direction at any time. It redefines what defense means. It's not about blocking and parrying from a safe distance. It's about making yourself an impossible target to hit cleanly while relentlessly advancing. The stance is the engine that drives this constant, unpredictable motion, turning a fighter into a living, breathing geometry problem that his opponents could never solve. It's the stable platform upon which all the chaos is built. So you've coiled the spring with the stance we just broke down, loading your legs and lowering your center of gravity. Now you have to build the shield. You have to create the armored shell that allows you to march through enemy fire. to get to your optimal range. And in the peekaboo system, that shield is the iconic, and again, highly unorthodox high guard. When you picture Mike Tyson in your mind's eye, this is probably the first thing you see, the black gloves pressed firmly against his cheeks, his intense eyes peering over the top. It looks simple, almost primitive, but like everything in this system, it's a piece of brutalist engineering with a dual purpose. It's both a fortress and a launch pad. Let's zoom in on the mechanics. A conventional boxing guard has the gloves floating somewhere around the chin or jawline, held a few inches away from the face. This creates space to parry and block, and it provides a clear field of vision. The peekaboo guard is fundamentally different. The gloves are anchored directly to the face, almost suction cupped to the cheeks. The thumbs are often resting on the cheekbones. The forearms are held vertically, and the elbows are tucked in so tightly they're practically scraping the fighter's ribs. What this creates is a compact, dense shell around the most critical targets. The chin is completely hidden, the jawline is shielded, the temples are protected by the curve of the gloves. It's an armadillo-like defense. Hooks that would normally land flush on the jaw now skid off the padded leather of the glove, or the bone of the forearm. Jabs that target the chin are blunted before they can land. It's a static defense designed for a dynamic fighter, but here's where the genius of Cus D'Amato really shines. The guard isn't just a passive shield, it's an offensive platform, a launching pad for some of the most efficient and deadly punches in boxing. Think about the economy of motion. In a traditional stance, to throw a powerful hook, you often have to bring your hand back slightly to load up, or at least rotate it into position. This takes time, milliseconds, yes, but in boxing, milliseconds are an eternity. It also creates a telegraph that a savvy opponent can see coming. With a peekaboo guard, the hands are already in a preloaded power position. A hook doesn't need to be brought back. It just needs to be rotated into the target. An uppercut doesn't need to be dipped down and brought up. It's already halfway there. The distance the fist has to travel from its defensive home on the cheek to the opponent's chin is cut in half. This means the punches are not only faster, but they are incredibly difficult to see coming. They explode into the opponent's consciousness with almost no warning. The perfect case study for this is Tyson's fight against the legendary Larry Holmes. Holmes possessed arguably the greatest jab in the history of the heavyweight division. His entire game was built around controlling distance with that ramrod left hand. Tyson's task seemed impossible. How do you get past that? The answer was the peekaboo guard. If you watch the fight, you'll see Tyson using that high, tight guard like the prow of an icebreaker ship. He's not trying to parry the jab. He's literally walking through it, letting it impact his gloves and forearms while he relentlessly closes the distance. The guard absorbs the punishment and neutralizes Holmes' primary weapon. Then, once he's inside, you see the second function of the guard take over. The final knockout sequence is a flurry of shots thrown from incredibly short range. The punches aren't looping haymakers. They are short, compact, explosive shots that are launched directly from that defensive shell on his face. He goes from defense to offense and back to defense in the blink of an eye, all because of the guard's unique positioning. Now, the main counter-argument you'll hear from boxing purists is that this high guard is fundamentally flawed because it obstructs your vision, and on its own, it absolutely would. If you just stood still with your gloves pressed to your face, you'd be a sitting duck for a straight punch right down the middle. But remember, no part of this system works in isolation. The guard is designed to work in concert with the constant head movement, which we're about to dive into. The fighter isn't meant to be staring through his gloves, he's looking over them, and as his head moves from side to side, he's constantly getting a different sight picture, peering around the left glove, then the right, the center line. The path for that straight punch is never in the same place for more than a fraction of a second. The system anticipates this weakness and turns it into a strength, creating a periscopic view of the battlefield that is constantly shifting, confusing the opponent's targeting computer, while keeping the practitioner himself perfectly safe inside his armored shell. So we built the foundation with that coiled spring of a stance, and we put the armored plating on top with a high guard, but a stationary fortress. No matter how well armored, it's still a target. An enemy can eventually zero in on it and find a way to breach the walls. The final piece of this defensive puzzle, the element that takes the peekaboo from a static defense to an unsolvable, dynamic enigma, is the perpetual motion machine of the head movement. This is the part that looks like magic. It's the visual signature of the style, that rhythmic, almost hypnotic bobbing and weaving that made Mike Tyson one of the most elusive heavyweights of all time. Let's break down what you're actually seeing. It's not just a random, jerky movement of the neck. It's a systematic, controlled pendulum swing powered by the legs and the torso. The head moves in a constant U shape. It slips to one side, drops down slightly as it crosses the center line, and comes up on the other side. Slip left, dip, rise right. Slip right, dip, rise left. It's a fluid, continuous loop of motion. Cus D'Amato would famously hang a numbered slip bag in the gym, and Tyson would spend hours, day after day, moving his head around it, drilling this exact motion until it was an involuntary reflex. The purpose is twofold, and it's here that the defensive genius solidifies. First, and most obviously, it disrupts the opponent's targeting. Boxing is a game of milliseconds. A professional boxer's punch is a complex neurological and physiological event. Their brain sees the target, calculates the distance, and sends a signal to fire the punch. This process relies on the target being relatively predictable. The peekaboo head movement throws a wrench into that entire process. An opponent aiming for the chin is aiming at a spot that, by the time the punch arrives a quarter of a second later, is now 6 inches to the left or right. Their brain is forced to constantly recalculate. This leads to hesitation. It leads to punches being thrown with less conviction. It forces them to aim for a general area rather than a specific point, which dissipates the power. You're effectively turning your head from a stationary bullseye into a fluttering butterfly. Second, and just as important, the movement is an offensive engine. This is the critical link between the style's defense and its devastating offense. Every defensive movement preloads the body for a counterpunch. When you slip your head outside of an incoming jab to your right, your body weight is now loaded onto your right leg, coiled and ready to fire a thunderous right hand over the top of their extended jab. When you bob down and under a hook, you are in the perfect position to come up with a devastating uppercut to the chin or drive a hook into the body. The head movement isn't just about making them miss. It is about making them miss in a way that puts you in the perfect position to make them pay. You are using their offensive momentum against them, turning their attack into the trigger for your own. The absolute masterclass in the psychological power of this head movement is Tyson's 91-second demolition of Michael Spinks. Spinks was an undefeated, intelligent, and highly skilled champion. He was not some journeyman, but from the opening bell, he was utterly paralyzed. Watch his eyes. He's trying to find the target. He wants to throw his straight right hand, the Spinks jinx. But Tyson's head is a blur. It's left, it's right, it's down. Spinks throws a few tentative, pawing punches, and Tyson isn't there. He slips outside them effortlessly and is suddenly inches away, in perfect position to counter. You can see the panic setting in. The head movement didn't just make Spinks miss. It made him terrified to even commit to a punch, because he knew that the moment he did, he would be vulnerable to a counter he couldn't see coming. The fight was over before the first real punch landed, because the perpetual motion had already won the psychological war. Now, the classic counter argument here is one of energy conservation. Critics of the style will say that this constant motion is a huge waste of energy and that the fighter will inevitably gas out in the later rounds. Why not just move your head when you see a punch coming? And this is a valid point in the context of conventional boxing, but the peekaboo system operates on a different philosophy. It's a calculated investment of energy. Yes, the practitioner is burning fuel with every slip and bob, but they are forcing their opponent to burn far more mental and physical fuel in return. The frustration, the hesitation, the constant resetting, the stress of trying to hit a ghost that is profoundly exhausting. It's a war of attrition fought on a neurological level. A D'Amato-trained fighter was conditioned to handle this output. Their opponent was not. The goal is to drain the opponent's battery, both physical and mental, faster than your own. And this constant, nagging, unsolvable movement is one of the primary tools for doing just that. It completes the defensive triad. The stance provides the platform, the guard provides the shield, and the head movement ensures the target is never there to be hit in the first place. Alright, so the defensive shell is complete. The system is working. You've used that coiled stance, that high fortress of a guard, and that perpetual head motion to navigate the storm. You've slipped past the jab, you've bobbed under the hook, and you have successfully closed the distance. You are now inside the opponent's effective range, standing chest to chest with a man who is likely much taller than you. Now what? How does a 5'10" man generate the concussive, almost supernatural power to knock out these giants? The answer, and this is where we really get into the brutal science of the style, isn't in his arms. It's not in his shoulders. It's in the swivel. It's in the generation of pure, unadulterated torque. Here's where we get into the pure physics of it. Torque is, in simple terms, rotational force. It's the twisting power you use to open a stubborn jar lid or turn a wrench in boxing. It's the single most important factor in generating knockout power. Many fighters have strength, but only the truly great punchers have mastered the art of generating maximum torque. The entire peekaboo system, right from that squared-up stance we talked about, is designed to turn the human body into the most efficient torque-generating engine possible. Think about that stance again. By being more square to the opponent, you give your hips and torso a much wider range of motion to rotate, to twist. A traditional bladed stance limits how much you can turn your hips into a punch, especially the rear hand. The peekaboo stance unlocks them. Now let's look at the mechanics of a classic Tyson hook, what we're calling the swivel. Forget the arm for a second and watch the feet. When he throws a left hook, the first thing that happens is the ball of his left foot digs into the canvas and pivots, almost like he's grinding a cigarette, but into the ground. That single, small movement is the ignition switch for the entire kinetic explosion. That pivot of the foot allows his hips to snap around violently. And I mean violently, if you watch in slow motion. It's like his lower body and upper body are two separate entities twisting against each other. This savage rotation of the hips is then transferred up through his core, his obliques, his abdominals, and into his torso. The torso and shoulder follow the hips, accelerating the rotation. The arm, which has stayed bent and compact, is the very last part of the chain. It doesn't create the power, it's just the delivery system. It's the tip of the whip. All that rotational energy generated from the ground up, starting at the big toe and magnified through the hips and core, is channeled into a single point, his fist, just a few inches from the target. This is why he was so devastatingly powerful even with short punches. He didn't need a long, winding haymaker to generate force. He could do it in a phone booth because the power wasn't coming from the length of his arm swing. It was coming from the speed and ferocity of his body's rotation. A perfect, clinical example is the final knockdown of Jose Ribalta in their 1986 fight. Ribalta was an incredibly tough opponent who took Tyson into the 10th round. But in that final round, Tyson lands a left hook that sends him crashing down. If you isolate that punch and watch it, you see the entire system at work. You see the left foot pivot. You see the hip swivel with impossible speed. You see the right side of his body almost disappear behind him as he rotates. And the hook lands with a concussive force that is terrifying to behold. It's a punch that travels maybe 12 inches, but it carries the rotational force of his entire 120-pound frame. This brings us to a crucial counter-argument to a common belief. The average fan looks at a young Mike Tyson with his 20-inch neck, his massive traps, and his tree trunk legs and assumes his power was a gift of genetics. They think he was just born a freakishly strong man who could knock people out, and while he was, without a doubt, a phenomenal athlete, that view completely dismisses the science and the skill involved. His power was not a gift, it was a meticulously crafted weapon. It was drilled into him by Cus D'Amato. There have been thousands of physically strong heavyweights in history, but very few had the one-punch fight any power of Tyson. Why? Because they hadn't mastered the mechanics of torque. They threw arm punches. They used their shoulders and their brute strength. Tyson was different. He was a physicist in the ring, applying principles of rotational force with a level of efficiency the sport has rarely seen. The power didn't come from his muscles. It came from his technique. The muscles were just the engine that drove the perfect scientific blueprint of the swivel. So we've established that the devastating power of the peekaboo style comes from the swivel, this incredible generation of rotational force. But that begs the next question. How does that force, which starts with a simple pivot of the foot on the canvas, get transferred so cleanly and with so much magnification all the way to the fist? This is where we need to put on our biomechanics lab coat and look at a principle called the kinetic chain, sometimes referred to as kinetic linking. This concept is the true secret behind why Mike Tyson's punches were not just fast, but incredibly heavy. It's the science of turning the entire human body into a single, seamless weapon. Imagine cracking a bullwhip. The power doesn't come from your wrist. It starts in your shoulder and torso, a relatively slow but powerful movement. That energy flows down your arm, with each segment moving faster than the one before it, until that final, explosive crack at the tip. The kinetic chain in boxing works on the exact same principle. It's a sequence of coordinated movements. where energy is generated by the largest, slowest parts of the body, the legs and hips, and is then progressively transferred and amplified through smaller, faster body segments until it is finally delivered by the fist. A breakdown in any link of that chain results in a massive loss of power. A perfect connection results in a knockout. Let's trace the energy path of a classic Tyson right hand. It all starts with the ground. This is the most overlooked part of punching power. As Tyson decides to throw the punch, his back foot pushes hard against the canvas. Thanks to Newton's third law of motion, the canvas pushes back with an equal and opposite force. This ground reaction force is the raw energy, the very seed of the punch. This energy shoots up his leg, and this is where the first stage of amplification happens. The powerful muscles in his legs, his glutes and quads, use this ground force to initiate a violent rotation of his hips. This is the engine room. The hips and pelvis are the link between the lower and upper body, and their ability to rotate with speed and power determines the punch's ceiling. From the hips, the energy flows upwards into the core. Think of the core, the abdominals and obliques as the transmission of a car. A strong, rigid core ensures that the rotational energy from the hips is transferred seamlessly to the torso, without any of it leaking out or dissipating. The torso then rotates, adding its own mass and acceleration to the equation. The shoulder is carried along for the ride, and now you have all of this cumulative force. This tidal wave of rotational energy ready to be unleashed. The arm, until this point, has been largely passive. It's been a passenger. Now, the shoulder's rotation slings the arm forward, the tricep fires to extend it, and the fist, the final link in the chain, makes impact. The entire sequence from floor to fist happens in a fraction of a second, but it's this perfect, unbroken chain that allows a 220-pound man's entire body mass to be focused onto a few square inches of leather. A chillingly perfect example of this is the 30-second knockout of Marvis Frazier. The finishing blow is a colossal right uppercut. If you watch it in slow motion, it's a living textbook on the kinetic chain. You see Tyson in his low crouch, the one we discussed in section 2. He dips slightly, loading his legs, then he explodes upwards. You can literally see the power originating from the floor. It's not an arm punch, it's a full body eruption. The ground force shoots up his legs, his hips and torso twist as he rises. And all of that vertical and rotational energy is channeled straight up into Frazier's chin. Frazier isn't just hit by an arm, he's hit by the entire kinetic force of Mike Tyson's body coming up from the canvas. This helps us counter a very common belief in boxing, that power is all about fast hands. You hear it all the time. But hand speed, on its own, is overrated. You can have the fastest hands in the world, but if they aren't connected to the rest of your body through the kinetic chain, you're just throwing slaps. They might be fast, they might score points, but they lack the concussive, heavy quality that causes knockouts. The peekaboo philosophy isn't about throwing the fastest punches. It's about throwing the most efficient and heaviest punches. It prioritizes the integrity of the kinetic chain above all else. Tyson's hands were certainly fast, but what made them terrifying was the fact that behind each blur of motion was the unified mass of his entire body, perfectly linked and delivered on time. It was the difference between getting hit by a bullet and getting hit by a cannonball. The peekaboo style was designed to throw cannonballs. We've seen how the kinetic chain allows a fighter to generate immense power from a stable, grounded base. The energy flows from the canvas up. But what happens when the opponent is savvy? What happens when they're trying to use footwork to stay just on the edge of your range, in that frustrating zone where you can't quite reach them with a conventional punch? How do you close that final foot or two of distance and deliver a knockout blow simultaneously? For this specific problem, the architect Cus D'Amato had a specific and terrifying solution. He called it the gazelle punch, and it is one of the most explosive and athletically demanding techniques in all of boxing. The gazelle punch is exactly what it sounds like. It's a leaping punch, typically a hook or an uppercut, where the fighter literally launches themselves through the air towards their opponent. This isn't just a big step, it's a genuine leap, an explosion of forward momentum. The punch is thrown while the fighter is in midair or just as they are landing. Biomechanically, it's a beautiful, brutal piece of physics. It takes the principles of the kinetic chain and torque that we've already discussed and adds another potent ingredient into the mix: linear momentum. The formula for linear momentum is mass times velocity P equals mv. By leaping, the fighter is taking their entire body mass and accelerating it towards the target. This forward momentum is then added to the rotational power of the swivel, creating a collision of forces that is exponentially more powerful than a standard stationary punch. The movement is initiated from that low, coiled peekaboo stance. The fighter explodes off their back foot, driving their body forward like a sprinter coming out of the blocks. As they are propelled through the air, they begin the rotation, the hips and torso swivel, and the hook or uppercut is timed to land at the moment of maximum forward velocity. It serves two critical purposes at once. First, it's a devastatingly effective way to close distance. An opponent who believes they are at a safe range, just outside the pocket, is suddenly and shockingly met with a power punch. Their brain simply can't process the speed with which the gap has been closed. Second, the power is astronomical. You're not just getting hit by a punch, you're getting hit by the full body impact of a 220-pound projectile. The quintessential, picture-perfect example of this technique is Mike Tyson's knockout of Lorenzo Boyd. There's a famous photo of the finishing blow, and it's a work of art. In it, Tyson is throwing a massive left hook, and you can see that both of his feet are completely off the canvas at the moment of impact. His entire body is horizontal, flying through the air. You see him launch from the other side of the ring, a blur of motion. His back foot digs into the canvas and propels his frame forward. While airborne, he torques his body and unleashes the hook. Boyd never sees it coming. He's expecting to have more time, more space. The punch lands, and the force is simply overwhelming. It's not just a punch to the head, it's a full body collision. This wasn't a Tyson-specific invention either. Remember Floyd Patterson, Cus's first champion? He was famous for his leaping kangaroo hook, the original gazelle punch, which he used to knock out taller opponents like Archie Moore. It is a core tenet of the D'Amato system. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking, and it's what every boxing coach would immediately point out. This is a massive, almost insane, defensive risk. Leaping into a punch breaks the #1 rule of boxing. Always keep your feet on the ground. When you're in the air, you are completely vulnerable. You can't move your head, you can't pivot, you can't block effectively, and you are supremely susceptible to a counter punch that could knock you out cold. So why do it? The counter argument is that the gazelle punch is not a tool to be used lightly. It's not a jab, it's a finisher. It's a calculated, high-risk, high-reward maneuver that is deployed only when the conditions are perfect. The rest of the peekaboo system, the constant pressure, the head movement, the body work is what creates the opening for the seemingly reckless attack. The opponent is already flustered, their vision is obscured, their rhythm is broken. They race so worried about the punches in close that they don't even conceive of a threat. From farther out, the gazelle punch is a pattern interrupt. It's a moment of planned chaos, exploiting the mental fatigue and defensive shell that the system has already imposed on the opponent. It's a checkmate move in a game that has been systematically leading to that exact moment. That kind of explosive, almost reckless-looking attack like the gazelle punch doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It can't. It requires a specific set of circumstances. It requires the opponent to be hurt, to be stationary, to be exactly where you want them to be. And achieving that position, pinning down a world-class athlete who is actively trying to get away from you, is not a matter of just charging forward. It's a matter of strategy, of pressure, and most importantly, of geometry. This is where we need to analyze the predatory footwork of the peekaboo style and the brutal science of cutting off the ring. This is the chess match that sets up the violent checkmate. The fundamental goal of the peekaboo footwork is to shrink the boxing ring. A standard 20 by 20 foot ring feels like an open field to a tall, rangy boxer. It's their ideal habitat. They can move, they can circle, they can keep the shorter fighter at the end of their jab. The peekaboo practitioner's first job is to turn that open field into a closet. This is done not by chasing, but by cutting off. There's a huge difference. If you just chase your opponent, you're following them, they control the dance, they can pivot, change direction, and keep you constantly one step behind. Cutting off the ring is about anticipation. It is about using lateral movement and intelligent angles to get to where your opponent is going to be, not where they are. Here's how it works. Imagine your opponent is in the center of the ring, and they want to circle out to their left. If you just run straight at them, they'll sidestep you with ease. The peekaboo fighter, from that coiled stance we talked about, doesn't move forward. They take a hard, shuffling step diagonally to their left. They take the more efficient path, the straight line, while the opponent has to take the longer, curved path. By the time the opponent has moved a few feet, you are already there, blocking their path. You've cut off that side of the ring. Now they have two choices: stop and engage you, which is what you want, or try to circle out the other way. When they switch direction, you simply repeat the process, shuffling laterally to cut off their new escape route. It's a relentless, suffocating process of removing options, of herding your opponent towards the ropes and corners where their footwork advantage is completely nullified. But the true mastery of this is in creating traps. It's not just about cornering an opponent. It's about making them choose their own doom. A master of the style, like Tyson, wouldn't just cut off all escape routes. He would intentionally leave one open, an apparent path to safety. He might position himself to make it seem like circling out to his left is the opponent's best bet. But it's a trap. He knows that as the opponent commits to moving in that direction, their body will be turning, their guard will be slightly out of position, and they will be walking directly into the path of his most powerful weapon, the left hook. The footwork isn't just defensive, it's a baited hook, using geography to manipulate the opponent into a predictable pattern that leads directly into a pre-planned offensive combination. A phenomenal case study in this is his fight against the 1980 for Olympic super heavyweight gold medalist Tyrell Biggs. Biggs was 6'5" with an 82-inch reach. His entire game plan was to stick and move, to use his long legs and jab to stay away from Tyson. But from the opening bell, Tyson put on a clinic in ring cutting. Watch the fight. You'll see Biggs trying to circle, trying to find space, but everywhere he turns, Tyson is already there. He isn't running. He's taking these short, explosive lateral steps, always keeping Biggs in front of him. You can visibly see the ring shrinking around Biggs. The pressure is immense, not just because Tyson is a threat to knock him out, but because he has no room to breathe, no space to think. The relentless, intelligent footwork is what breaks Biggs down mentally long before the physical. Punishment leads to the 7th round TKO. This directly counters the common perception of Tyson as just a human bulldozer who simply walked through his opponents. People see the unstoppable forward aggression and they mistake it for a lack of subtlety. The counter-argument is that the forward movement was the result of his brilliant lateral footwork, not the cause of his success. He wasn't just charging in a straight line. He was constantly making micro-adjustments, calculating angles, and building a cage within the cage. The reason it looked like a simple forward march was because his ring cutting was so masterful that his opponents had no choice but to retreat straight backward. He wasn't following them, he was directing them. It was a brutal, physically imposed chess match, and the geometry of his footwork was the foundation of his entire devastating attack. The predatory footwork has done its job. The geometry has been solved. The ring has been systematically shrunk. The opponent is cornered against the ropes, and their primary advantage space has been eliminated. They are now forced to stand their ground and fight in a phone booth, the ideal habitat for a peekaboo practitioner. So how do you navigate this most dangerous phase of the fight? How do you close those final 12 inches, get past the opponent's arms, and unleash hell? The answer lies in one of the most visually distinct and widely misunderstood techniques in the sweet science, the bob and weave. Let's debunk a major myth right now. For the average viewer, and even for many casual fans of the sport, bobbing and weaving is seen as a purely defensive maneuver. It's just ducking punches, right? It's a way to make the other guy miss. While that is true, it's only about 20% of the story, especially within the D'Amato system. In the peekaboo philosophy, the bob and weave is not a retreat. It's not a passive evasion. It is a primary tool of infiltration. It is an aggressive, offensive form of locomotion designed to get you from point A just outside the opponent's punches to point B deep inside their guard, in a position to do maximum damage. Let's differentiate. A bob is a simple level change, bending at the knees to duck under a straight punch. A weave is a rolling motion of the upper body, typically used to get under a looping hook and come up on the other side. The peekaboo style fuses these into one fluid, continuous motion. It's a rolling of the shoulders, a constant changing of levels, powered by the legs and core. When an opponent throws a punch, the fighter doesn't just duck it. They use the punch as a guide. They roll underneath it, using the momentum of the evasion to propel themselves forward and into a new, more advantageous angle of attack. The goal isn't just to make the hook miss over your head. The goal is to use that opportunity to get your head past their shoulder line, placing yourself in a dominant position where you can attack their body and they can't effectively hit you. A fantastic illustration of this principle in action is the second fight between Mike Tyson and the formidable Frank Bruno. Bruno was a physical specimen, tall, muscular, with a powerful jab and a concussive right hand. He wanted to keep Tyson at a distance. To get inside, Tyson gave a masterclass in offensive weaving. You can see sequences where Bruno will throw his classic 1-2. As the jab comes, Tyson will do a quick bob, dropping his level so the punch sails harmlessly over his head. Now the right hand is coming. Instead of just staying down or backing up, Tyson weaves hard to his left, rolling his entire upper body underneath Bruno's extended right arm. Now, pause the frame right there. Look at the position he's in. His head is now on the inside of Bruno's arm, almost touching his ribs. Bruno's arms are out of position, extended and useless in this range. But Tyson, he is in the perfect position to unload a savage, unimpeded salvo of hooks and uppercuts to the body and head. The weave was not a defensive move, it was a key that unlocked the door to Bruno's body. The most common counter argument against a bob and a weave style is its perceived vulnerability to the uppercut. And this is a legitimate threat. If a fighter's movement is a simple, predictable up and down bob, a smart opponent will time it and throw a devastating uppercut right into their path. It's the classic counter. So how does the peekaboo system solve this? It does so by ensuring the movement is never simple and never predictable. Remember the side-to-side pendulum head movement we broke down in section 4? That movement is integrated with the bob and weave. The fighter never just drops straight down. They drop down and to the left. They drop down and to the right. It's a spherical movement, not a linear one. They feint a bob, draw the uppercut, and then weave to the side. The rhythm is constantly being changed. By making the level change part of a chaotic, multi-directional pattern, it becomes nearly impossible for an opponent to time that perfect uppercut. The system anticipates the counter and builds in the solution, turning a potential weakness into just another layer of unsolvable complexity for the opponent. The bob and weave is the perfect tool for navigating the close-range chaos, for getting under the wide, looping hooks and turning a brawl into a science. But what about the most fundamental punch in all of boxing? What about the weapon that every tall fighter builds their entire game around, the jab? For this, the D'Amato system doesn't use the broad, rolling motion of the weave. It employs a far more subtle, more efficient, and more surgical technique. We're talking about the slip and counter, a movement that is less a boxing technique and more a symphony of violent, reactive poetry. A slip is not a duck or a bob. It's a minimalist masterpiece of evasion. The goal is to move your head just enough, a matter of inches, to make the opponent's punch slide past your ear. It's a tight rotation of the shoulders and torso, a slight bend in the knees, a whisper of movement that takes your head off the center line just as the punch arrives. It is the pinnacle of defensive efficiency. But within the peekaboo system, the slip is never, ever just a defensive move. The opponent's jab is not seen as a threat, it is seen as a trigger. It's the starting pistol for a pre-programmed, devastating the effective counterattack. The evasion and the retaliation are not two separate actions. They are one single, seamless, beautiful motion. Let's break down the mechanics. When an orthodox fighter throws a jab at you, you have two primary options. You can slip to the outside, moving your head to your right. As you do this, your weight naturally shifts and loads onto your back right leg, and your right shoulder dips and coils back. What have you just done? You have simultaneously dodged the punch and perfectly preloaded your own right hand, as their jab is flying past your head, leaving them extended and momentarily defenseless on that side. Your right hand is already in the launch position. It can be fired directly over the top of their jab in a short, powerful arc that they simply cannot see coming. The second option is to slip to the inside, moving your head to your left, inside their jab. This is often considered more dangerous because you're moving towards their rear power hand, but the reward is immense. As you slip inside, your weight loads onto your lead left leg, coiling your body for a left hook to the body or the head. From that inside position, you are in the perfect spot to rip a punch into their exposed ribs or come up with an uppercut that splits their guard. In both cases, the defensive movement is the offensive wind up. There's zero wasted motion. The opponent's attack becomes the fuel for your own. A fighter who absolutely mastered this was Tyson in his bout against Pinklin Thomas. Thomas was a former WBC heavyweight champion, a skilled boxer with a very good, technical jab that he liked to use to control fights. Tyson's performance against him was a masterclass in systematically dismantling a jab. If you watch the footage, you'll see a recurring pattern. Thomas would pump out his jab, trying to establish range, but before the punch was even halfway to the target, Tyson's head would already be off the center line. he'd make this tiny, economical slip to the outside, and in the exact same fluid motion, a thunderous right hand would come crashing over the top. It happened again and again. You can see the confidence draining from Thomas. The very tool he relied on to win fights was now the trigger that was getting him punished. It creates an impossible dilemma. If you jab, you get countered. If you don't jab, you get run over. This brings us to the counter argument, which is that slipping, especially to the inside, is fundamentally risky. You're voluntarily moving your head closer to your opponent's power hand. A simple jab right-hand combination could, in theory, knock you out cold. So why is it so effective in this system? The risk is mitigated by the system's inherent speed and aggression. The counter punch is thrown with such explosive speed from the slip that the opponent simply doesn't have time to follow up with their right hand. By the time their brain has processed the information that their jab missed, the counter punch has already landed, disrupting their balance and their thought process. The system's proactive nature short-circuits the opponent's reactive combinations. It's a high-stakes gamble, yes, but the peekaboo style rigs the game in your favor by ensuring your retaliation always lands before theirs can even be launched. It's the ultimate expression of turning defense into immediate, punishing offense. Slipping a punch is the ideal scenario. It's the clean kill. You use your opponent's momentum, you make them miss completely, and you punish them for the error. It's beautiful. But boxing, especially at the elite level and in the close quarters that the peekaboo style demands, is rarely that clean. You're in a firefight. Punches are coming in bunches from all angles. You can't slip everything. So what happens when a punch is going to land? What's the next best thing to making them miss? The answer is to absorb the blow in such a way that it sets up your own immediate offense. This is the principle behind the catch and pitch, a technique that turns your defensive guard from a passive shield into a reactive weapon. Let's first define our terms, because this is not the same as blocking. When most people think of blocking, they picture a fighter shelling up, hiding behind their arms, and just weathering the storm. It's a passive, survival-oriented move. Catching a punch is an active, offensive-minded technique. Instead of just letting the punch hit your guard, you actively meet it with your glove or forearm. It's a subtle but crucial difference. You're not reaching out for the punch, which would overextend you. You're maintaining your tight, high guard, and at the moment of impact, you're making a small, firm motion to intercept the punch, absorbing its energy and slightly deflecting its path. You are the catcher in baseball, receiving the ball in the firmest part of the mitt. Now for the second half of the equation, the pitch. The name says it all. The very instant, the nanosecond that your glove catches the opponent's punch, you fire back with your other hand. It is an immediate, tit-for-tat retaliation. There is no pause. There is no thought. It is a drilled-in reflex. Catch with the right, pitch with the left. Catch with the left, pitch with the right. The entire purpose is to interrupt the opponent's offensive rhythm and capitalize on the momentary opening created by their own punch. A fighter expects to throw a punch, retract their arm, and then throw another. The catch and pitch short circuits that entire sequence. You are hitting them back while their first punch is still in your zip code. This is profoundly disruptive and psychologically jarring for an opponent. While Tyson was an expert at this, if you want to see a true master of the catch and pitch, a living embodiment of the technique, you have to look at the legendary Joe Frazier. His style, while not a direct D'Amato creation, shared many of the same principles of relentless pressure and infighting. In his epic fight of the century against Muhammad Ali, Frazier put on an absolute clinic. Ali had the fastest jab in the game, a stinging, blinding punch he threw in volume. It was impossible to slip all of them, so Frazier didn't try. He would march forward behind his high guard, and as Ali's jab came out, Frazier would catch it on his left forearm or glove, and the very moment Ali's leather touched him, Frazier's own iconic left hook would explode towards Ali's body or head. He was turning Ali's greatest weapon into the dinner bell for his own offense. Tyson employed the same logic against high-volume punchers like James Bonecrusher Smith, catching their wide, aggressive shots and firing his own straight, more powerful counters right down the middle. Now, the obvious counter-argument to a technique like this is, well, you're getting hit. You are intentionally letting an elite heavyweight punch you, albeit on your arms and gloves. Isn't this just a recipe for a slow, attritional defeat? Won't the damage accumulate? And that is a valid concern. This is not a primary line of defense, it's a secondary one. It's what you do when the slip isn't an option. But the peekaboo system is built to win this brutal equation. First, as we discussed with the high guard, The defensive shell is designed for this. The gloves are padded, the forearms are conditioned, and the elbows are tucked to protect the body. It's far better to take a shot on the arm than on the chin. Second, it's a calculated trade. You are trading a blocked, low-impact punch for a clean, high-impact counter-punch on an exposed opponent. It's a brutal kind of math. The system is betting that your chin is better than theirs and that your counters are more damaging than their leads. It's a technique for a fighter who is willing to walk through the fire, confident that the furnace on the other side is their own. So the strategic footwork has done its job, cornering the prey. The bob and a weave has gotten you past the outer perimeter of their guard. The slips and the catch and pitch have allowed you to navigate their initial counter barrage. You are now officially in the trenches. You're in the pocket, chest to chest with a man who wants nothing more than to get you away from him. This is the phone booth, and for most fighters, this is a dangerous, chaotic 50-50 territory. But for a practitioner of the peekaboo style, this is home. This is where the system is not just effective, it's utterly dominant. Welcome to the art of smothering and suffocating your opponent through technical infighting. The entire philosophy of peekaboo infighting is built around a concept you could call offensive smothering. The goal is to get so close to your opponent that you take away the physical space. They need to generate leverage on their punches. Think about it. A tall fighter with long arms needs distance to extend and snap their shots. Their power comes from that extension. The peekaboo fighter's objective is to get inside that extension, to live in that space right against their chest where their long arms become a liability. At that range, their punches become ineffective pushes or cramped, powerless slaps. You are defending yourself, not just by blocking or slipping, but by taking away the very possibility of them launching a meaningful offense. It's a proactive, geographical defense. This isn't just done with the hands. In close quarters, the entire upper body becomes a weapon and a tool. You'll see a master infighter like Tyson use his head and shoulders constantly. He'll press his forehead into the opponent's chest or shoulder, not in a dirty way, but as a method of control. This allows him to feel their movements, to disrupt their balance, and to create a solid anchor point from which to pivot. He'll use his shoulders and forearms to create frames, pushing and levering the opponent to create tiny pockets of space, just big enough to land his own short, brutal punches while keeping them jammed up. It's a form of physical bullying, but it's incredibly technical. It's about being in constant contact, a constant, nagging pressure that is as mentally draining as it is physically exhausting. It induces a feeling of claustrophobia, of being perpetually controlled and unable to reset. A prime example of this strategy in action is the first fight against Donovan "Razor" Ruddock. Ruddock was a genuinely terrifying puncher, a big, strong heavyweight with a bizarre and devastating hybrid punch called the smash. The conventional wisdom would be to stay away from a man with that kind of power. Tyson's strategy was the opposite. He got inside of it. Watch the exchanges in that fight. The moment they get close, Tyson gives Ruddock zero breathing room. His head is on Ruddock's chest. His high guard is cemented to his face, and he is a constant ball of pressure. Ruddock tries to unleash his big power shots, but he has no space. His arms are cramped. His punches are short-circuited before they can even get started. And wow, Ruddock is being smothered. Tyson is in his element. He uses that inside position to make small pivots, creating angles to dig vicious, compact hooks into Ruddock's body and short, crisp uppercuts to the head. He is completely dismantling Ruddock's offense simply by occupying the space where it's born. Now, the classic counter to this smothering style is the clinch. What's to stop the opponent from just grabbing on for dear life, wrapping their arms around you to stop the punishment and wait for a referee to break it up? This is a common tactic to neutralize infighters, but the D'Amato system has a built-in and very painful solution to this. His fighters are taught to never accept the clinch as a neutral position. They are drilled to punch their way out. The moment an opponent tries to tie them up, their hands don't stop working. They are trained to keep just enough space to fire off a barrage of short, punishing, energy-sapping punches to the ribs, the solar plexus, the kidneys, any legal target they can hit. The goal is to make the opponent's intended safe space, the clinch, the most dangerous and painful place they can be. You make them pay a heavy price for every second they try to hold on. This conditions them to avoid clinching, which forces them back into an infight they are already losing. It's another example of the system anticipating a problem and engineering a brutal, effective solution. You've successfully navigated the no man's land. You're in the pocket. You're smothering your opponent. You're constant, Technical pressure is creating these fleeting, momentary openings for attack. An elbow flares out, a chin is left exposed for a split second. How do you capitalize on these opportunities with the absolute maximum speed, efficiency, and violence? In the D'Amato camp, this was not left to chance. It wasn't about wild improvisation. Cus D'Amato was a boxing scientist, and like any good scientist, he developed a system of classification. He created a coded language for his fighters, a numerical shorthand for violence that allowed them to unleash complex, flowing, and brutally effective combinations as if on autopilot. This is the famous Cus D'Amato number system. It's elegantly simple in its concept. Each punch in a fighter's arsenal was assigned a number. This created a clear, concise, and lightning-fast method of communication. In the chaos of a prize fight with the roar of the crowd and the fog of war, a trainer can't yell. Mike throw a jab to the head, then a right hook to the body, then a left uppercut to the chin. It's too long, too complicated. But he could yell 7-6-3, and his fighter would instantly know what to do. The most commonly accepted version of the code goes like this, so you can follow along. Number 7 is the jab to the head. Number 8 is the jab to the body. Then you have the power punches. Number 1 is a left hook to the head. Number 2 is a right hand to the head, which could be a cross or a hook depending on the range. Number 3 is a left uppercut. Number 4 is a right uppercut and the body shots. Number 5 is a left hook to the body, and number 6 is a right hand to the body. The genius of this system is twofold. First, as we mentioned, is the speed of communication. But its real power was in training, in the building of unshakable muscle memory. Tyson would spend countless hours in the gym, not just hitting a heavy bag, but hitting it with purpose. Cus or Kevin Rooney would call out sequences of numbers 7 to 153 to 814, and Tyson would drill these combinations thousands upon thousands of times. The goal was to burn these patterns into his central nervous system, to make the execution of a 3 or 4 punch combination as automatic and unconscious a process as walking. In the ring, he didn't have to think, my opponent just dropped his right hand, so I should throw a left hook. His body would just react, the opening would appear, and the drilled numerical sequence designed for that exact opening would be unleashed before his conscious mind even had time to process it. You can see the brutal results of this training in nearly all of his fights. A great example is the punch that dropped Buster Douglas at the end of the 8th round. In their fateful Tokyo fight, Tyson lands a colossal right uppercut that sends a much larger Douglas crashing to the canvas. Now, if you watch the sequence leading up to it, Tyson throws a few setup punches, maneuvering Douglas, and then the uppercut explodes from below. That wasn't a lucky punch. That was a 4. It was a 4 that his body had been trained to throw 10,000 times after a 7 or A2. It was a programmed response to a specific stimulus. It was the endpoint of a numerical sequence that was as ingrained in him as his own name. The system turned his body into a weapon that could fire off complex offensive patterns faster than an opponent could possibly react to them. Now, the natural counter-argument to a system like this is that it risks making a fighter robotic and predictable. If all you do is drill preset combinations, won't a smart, analytical opponent eventually figure out your patterns? A 7-2 is always followed by a 1, for example. This is a valid concern, but it misunderstands the philosophy behind the system. D'Amato wasn't trying to create a robot. He was trying to automate the fundamentals to such a high degree that it would liberate the fighter's mind for the higher level aspects of the game. By making the basic combinations an unconscious reflex, Tyson didn't have to waste precious mental energy thinking about what punches to throw. That freed him up to focus entirely on when to throw them, on timing, on feints, on reading his opponent's reactions, on the art of the setup. The number system gave him his vocabulary and grammar. It was still up to him to be the poet. It was a foundation of disciplined repetition that created the freedom for improvisational violence. The number system we just discussed gave Mike Tyson an entire orchestra of violence to conduct. A jab was a probing violin, an uppercut a booming tuba. But among all those devastating instruments, one stands alone as the lead soloist, the signature sound of his reign. We're talking about the 1, the left hook to the head, and its brutal cousin, the 5, the left hook to the body. It was the punch that filled arenas and ended fights in the blink of an eye. It was less a punch and more a seismic event that started at his toes and ended in his opponent's unconsciousness. So let's put this single, legendary punch under the lab microscope and dissect the anatomy of what might be the most biomechanically perfect knockout weapon in heavyweight history. To understand the hook, We have to build it from the ground up, because that's exactly where the power comes from. It all starts with the stance we broke down in section 2. That slightly squared up, front foot heavy position is the ideal launch pad. His lead foot is already in a position to grip the canvas, and his hips have the maximum possible range to rotate. This is the first, crucial piece of the puzzle. Now for the ignition. When Tyson decided to unleash the hook, the first movement was the pivot of his lead foot. He would grind the ball of his left foot into the mat, a motion often described as squashing a bug. This small action is the key that unlocks the kinetic chain. That pivot allows his hips to rotate with a speed and violence that has to be seen to be believed. This is the engine room we talked about in section 5, the generation of pure torque. The power is not coming from his arm, it's coming from the savage snap of his hips and core. The rotation travels up his body, and now we get to the delivery system, the arm. Watch a Tyson hook in slow motion. His arm is not loose like a whip, it's held in a rigid, bent position close to a 90-degree angle. It's like a steel L-beam. This structure is critical. It ensures that all the immense rotational force generated by his body is transferred directly into the fist without any energy being lost or dissipated through a wobbly arm. The arm itself is just the final, brutal conductor for the wave of energy that began on the floor. It's not an arm punch, it's a full body rotational event delivered by the fist. The quintessential display of this weapon and the terror it induced was the 91-second obliteration of the undefeated lineal heavyweight champion Michael Spinks. While the final punch was a right hand, the beginning of the end came from the left hook. Spinks came out looking utterly petrified, not of Tyson the man, but of that hook. A little over a minute in, with Spinks against the ropes, Tyson finds a jab to occupy Spinks' guard and then unleashes a devastating left hook to the body of Perfect 5 from the number system. Pause the fight right there. You can see every principle at work. You see the foot pivot. You see the explosive hip rotation. You see the arm, tight and compact, delivering the blow. The sound of the impact is sickening and Spinks' body just collapses. He gets up, but he's a broken man. That single punch is a perfect microcosm of the entire peekaboo power system, a masterclass in controlled, biomechanical destruction. This brings us to a crucial counter-argument. The textbook defense for a left hook is a straight right hand. Boxing 101 teaches you to throw your right hand over the top of the looping hook to catch the opponent clean. So why didn't this work against Tyson? The answer is that Tyson's left hook was the antithesis of the stereotypical, wide, looping brawler's hook because of the high guard. His hook didn't start from way out at his side. It started from his cheek. It was a short, tight, compact punch that traveled in a viciously small arc. There was no loop to throw a punch over. Furthermore, he rarely threw the hook naked. It was almost always preceded by a defensive maneuver. He would slip to the inside of a jab, and by the time he was in position, the opponent's right hand was no longer a threat. He was a master of creating a safe corridor for his most dangerous weapon. It was a surgical instrument disguised as a sledgehammer. If the brutal, sweeping left hook was Mike Tyson's signature scythe, the weapon he used for his horizontal attacks to cut opponents down from the side, then he possessed an equally terrifying tool for his vertical assault. This was the battering ram he used to split a guard right down the middle, to attack from a completely blind angle, and to produce some of the most electrifying highlight reel knockouts the sport has ever witnessed. We're talking about the 3 and the 4 from the number system, the left and right uppercuts. In the hands of a peekaboo master, this wasn't just a punch, it was an uppercut from hell. Unlike a jab or even a hook, the uppercut is not a lead punch. You cannot simply throw it from a distance and hope it lands. It is a situational weapon of devastating potential, and its effectiveness is almost entirely dependent on the setup. The peekaboo style has the primary, built-in setups that make the uppercut its natural companion. The first, as we discussed in section 9, is the bob and weave. When a fighter bobs down under a punch, they are loading their legs like a coiled spring. The natural upward motion of rising from that crouch flows seamlessly into the kinetic chain of an uppercut. The power doesn't come from the arm lifting, it comes from the legs driving up from the floor. The punch is an extension of a defensive movement that has already been completed. The second setup is the inside slip. When you slip your head to the inside of an opponent's jab, you end up in a crouched position, perfectly angled to fire an uppercut with your rear hand. Your head is safely off the center line. You have a clear, unimpeded path straight to their chin. But the real genius of the uppercut within this system is the angle of attack. Think about a standard defensive guard. It's designed to protect you from punches coming from the front jabs, crosses, and the sides hooks. But the uppercut doesn't follow those rules. It travels on a vertical axis, coming from below. It bypasses the guard entirely. It's a submarine launching a missile at a battleship. The battleship's guns are all pointing out to sea, and the attack comes from a dimension they are not prepared to defend. It often lands on the point of the chin, a punch an opponent literally never sees coming. A textbook example of the sheer, fight-ending power of this punch in close quarters is the knockout of Jesse Ferguson. In the fight, Ferguson is trying to survive. He's trying to do what so many opponents tried to do: clinch, hold, and smother Tyson to wait for a break from the referee. But as we've discussed, the peekaboo fighter never stops working in the clinch. Tyson creates just a few inches of space. That's all he needs. He dips his knee slightly, loading the spring, and explodes upwards with a single right uppercut. The punch travels maybe 6 inches. It looks almost effortless, but it is a pure kinetic chain explosion. The force starts at the canvas, shoots up his legs and core, and detonates on Ferguson's jaw. Ferguson is sent stumbling backward across the ring, completely disconnected from his senses. He didn't see it. He couldn't have. He was hit cleanly by a punch that was launched from a complete blind spot while he was trying to defend. Now, the traditional knock on the uppercut is that it's a risky, home run punch. The common wisdom is that if you miss with an uppercut, you leave yourself wildly exposed, off balance, and wide open for a counter hook. It's a high-risk, high-reward proposition. So why was it such a staple of this system? The counter is that the peekaboo uppercut is the polar opposite of a wild, swinging gamble, because it is only ever thrown in very specific situations from the deep crouch of a bob or the tight angle of a slip and from extremely close range. The risk is minimized. The punch travels a very short distance. If it misses, the fighter's hand is still close to their face, and they are still in their low, defensively sound stance, able to immediately snap back into their high guard. The setups are the key. The punch is only thrown when the opponent is already mid-punch or out of position, meaning their ability to counter effectively has already been compromised. It's not a gamble. It's the calculated, final move of a combination that began with a defensive masterstroke. The savage hooks and the explosive uppercuts are what created the legend. The highlight reels filled with thunderous, one-punch knockouts are what everyone remembers, and for good reason. They were spectacular, but if you only focus on the finishing blow, you're missing the brilliant and brutal setup work that made it all possible. If you want to understand the truly systematic genius of the peekaboo fighting machine, you have to look lower. You need to avert your eyes from the chin and focus on the torso. We need to talk about the relentless, systematic, and vicious body attack that was the unsung hero of Mike Tyson's dominance. This wasn't just about head hunting. This was about chopping down the tree. The body attack in the D'Amato system is a long-term investment, a strategy with 2 primary, interconnected goals. The first is simple, attritional warfare, draining the opponent's gas tank. Punches to the head can daze you, but punches to the body can steal your soul. A hard shot to the solar plexus can empty your lungs, making it impossible to breathe. A well-placed hook to the liver that's spot just under the right rib cage can trigger a full body nerve reaction that is indescribably painful and completely debilitating. Even accumulating shots to the ribs make every movement, every breath, an agonizing effort. A consistent body attack slows an opponent's footwork, takes the snap off their punches, and erodes their will to continue. It's the grunt work of boxing, but it pays massive dividends in the later rounds of a fight. The second goal is more tactical, and this is where the genius lies. It's about creating the opening. For the knockout, a fighter's natural, instinctual reaction to being hurt to the body is to protect it. They start dropping their elbows, lowering their guard to create a shield around their ribs. And what happens when the elbows drop? The chin, which was previously protected, becomes exposed. The body attack is the key that unlocks the door to the head. The peekaboo style is perfectly, almost poetically, designed to execute this strategy. Remember that low, coiled stance, that constant bobbing and weaving. These movements naturally put the fighter at the perfect height and angle to attack the body, while a tall, upright fighter has to punch down to hit the body. A peekaboo practitioner is already living at that level. It's their natural line of fire. A perfect case study for this is not one of his quick knockouts, but his 12-round unanimous decision victory over Tony Tucker. Tucker was a very skilled, undefeated champion. He was tall, he was durable, and he had a great jab. He wasn't going to be taken out with one punch, so Tyson went to work. If you watch that fight, you'll see a masterclass in systematic demolition. From the very first round, for every 2 or 3 punches Tyson threw at Tucker's head, he was digging at least 1 or 2 vicious hooks into his body. You could see Tucker physically reacting to them, wincing, his movements becoming more labored as the rounds go on. By round 8 or 9, Tucker's fluid, athletic boxing has been reduced to a slow, flat-footed struggle for survival. His hands have visibly dropped to protect his battered torso, and as a result, Tyson is now able to land his headshots with much greater ease. Tyson didn't get the knockout, but he won a dominant, one-sided decision by patiently and brutally chopping the tree down, one axe blow to the ribs at a time. This directly challenges the widely held perception of Mike Tyson as a pure, one-dimensional headhunter. This is a classic case of what you might call highlight reel bias, because his knockouts were so spectacular and so definitive, they are all anyone remembers. We see the final hook to the chin, but we don't see the 6 rounds of grueling bodywork that made that hook possible. We see the effect, not the cause. The truth is, a prime Mike Tyson was one of the most committed and effective body punchers in the modern history of the heavyweight division. The reputation as a simple, one-punch knockout artist, while earned, often obscures the reality of him as a methodical, intelligent pressure fighter who understood that the surest path to a man's chin was often through his rib cage. We've laid out the numbered combinations, the brutal hooks, the devastating uppercuts, and the strategic importance of the body attack. For most fighters, that would be more than enough. You drill those patterns, you execute them with power, and you win fights. But the truly legendary systems, the ones that become iconic, always have another layer of complexity, another tool in the box designed to break the very patterns they seek to establish. This is where we get into one of the most advanced, deceptive, and biomechanically fascinating techniques in the PKB arsenal, the shifting combination. So, what is a shift? At its core, it's a rapid, fluid change of stance from orthodox to southpaw, or vice versa, that happens in the middle of a punching combination. It's a sleight of hand trick performed with the feet, designed to create a completely unexpected angle of attack and to allow a fighter to do something that is normally biomechanically impossible. Throw consecutive full power hooks with both hands without resetting. Think about it. If you're in an orthodox stance, you throw a hard left hook, your body is rotated to the right. To now throw a powerful right hook, you'd have to unwind and then rewind your body in the opposite direction. There's a delay, a reset. The shift is a cheat code that eliminates that delay. Here's how a classic shifting combination works. Let's say the fighter throws a big left hook. As their body's momentum carries them through the punch, instead of planting their feet and returning to their stance, they allow their rear right foot to step forward, past their lead left foot. For a split second, they are now standing in a southpaw stance. The beauty of this is that the rotation from the initial left hook has perfectly preloaded their body to throw a right hook from this new stance. Their hips and torso are already coiled to the right, so immediately after the left hook lands, they can unleash a full power right hook from a southpaw position. It's a one-two of pure power hooks, something an opponent is simply not programmed to defend against. They're expecting a straight right hand after a left hook, not another hook from a mirrored stance. While it's a technique he used throughout his career, one of the clearest and most violent examples of the shift comes from a later career fight against Lou Savarese. Tyson hurt Savarese early with a huge left hand. Savarese is stumbling backward, completely disoriented. Tyson presses the attack, throwing another left hook. Now, watch his feet as the momentum of that hook swings through. You see his right foot slide forward, and for a brief moment, he's a southpaw. From that new platform, he unloads a titanic right hook that lands flush and sends Savarese down hard. The entire sequence is a blur. Savarese's brain is still trying to process the danger from the orthodox left hook. He has no way of anticipating or defending a full power right hook coming from a completely new and unexpected angle. It is a masterclass in weaponized deception. Now, the immediate and obvious criticism of the shift is that, defensively, it's absolute madness. For that brief moment when you are switching your feet, you are completely square, off balance, and horribly vulnerable. Both feet are often parallel or close together. It breaks every rule of defensive posture. A well-timed jab or cross from an opponent during the shift could be catastrophic, and this is entirely true, but this is where we have to remember the context. Much like the gazelle punch, the shift is not an opening move, it is a finisher's tool. It is a high-risk, high-reward technique that is only deployed when the opponent is already badly hurt, in retreat, and thinking only of survival, not of counter-punching. The sheer, overwhelming aggression with which the shift is executed also gives the opponent virtually no time to recognize the momentary defensive lapse and capitalize on it. It's a calculated, all-or-nothing gamble to end the fight right then and there. It's the final, unpredictable flourish in a system built on overwhelming the senses. The shift is a spectacular, grand-scale deception, a tactical haymaker designed to end the fight. But a spectacular finish, whether it's a physical punch or a tactical maneuver, doesn't just materialize out of thin air. It needs a setup. It needs to be preceded by a series of smaller, subtler lies that condition the opponent, manipulate their reactions, and create the perfect opening for the final blow. This is where we peel back the layer of brute force and uncover the true intellectual depth, the cunning brain behind the brawn of the peak. A boo style. We're talking about the constant, almost subliminal art of the feint and misdirection. A feint is so much more than just faking a punch. In the hands of a master, a feint is a sophisticated tool for information gathering and psychological manipulation. First, it's a question you ask with your body. You twitch your shoulder as if you're about to throw a hook. How does your opponent react? Do they flinch? Do they raise their guard? Do they try to counter? Their response is data. You feint a jab. Do they slip to the outside? Do they try to parry it? Do they freeze? Every reaction they have to a lie you tell them is a piece of intelligence that informs your real attack. This is the data gathering phase, and it happens in a split second. Once you have the data, you move to the manipulation phase. Now that you know how they will react, you can use their own reflexes against them. Let's say you've learned that every time you feint a jab to the head, your opponent drops their lead hand slightly to parry it. Now the trap is set. You feint the jab again, they drop their hand just as you predicted, and instead of the jab, you come over the top with a real power right hand into the opening they just created for you. You are no longer just fighting them, you are puppeteering them, using their own drilled and defensive reactions to lead them into your traps. The peekaboo style employs a whole vocabulary of these feints. A sudden dip of the head to mimic a bob, a sharp twitch of the shoulder, a quick stomp of the foot to force a reaction, a sudden level change to threaten a body shot. It's a constant stream of lies. For a perfect, albeit brief, exhibition of this, go back to that Michael Spinks fight. The 91 seconds of action are preceded by a masterclass in feinting. Before the first significant punch is even thrown, just watch Tyson's body language. He takes the center of the ring and becomes a whirlwind of misdirection. You see a sharp dip of his head, and Spinks visibly flinches. You see a quick, aggressive stomp of his lead foot, and Spinks takes a nervous, hurried step backward. You see a subtle roll of his left shoulder, and Spinks defensively raises his right glove in anticipation of a hook that never comes. In these opening moments, Tyson is a scientist conducting a series of rapid-fire experiments. He is downloading all the data he needs. The brutal knockout that follows isn't just an act of overwhelming power, it's the clinical, logical conclusion based on the information he gathered with his feints. He knew exactly what opening Spinks would give him because he asked the question first. This directly attacks one of the most common misconceptions in boxing, that feinting is for slick, stick and move boxers and that aggressive pressure fighters are just artless brawlers. The perception is that feinting is subtle and styles like the peekaboo are not. This is fundamentally wrong. I would argue that feinting is more critical for a pressure fighter than for any other style. A tall, rangy fighter can afford to feint from a safe distance. A shorter, infighting pressure fighter has to lie their way into the danger zone. Every single step forward must be paved with deception. The feints are the cover fire that occupy the opponent's mind. They create hesitation. They paralyze them with indecision. That split second of hesitation is the window the peekaboo fighter needs to close the distance safely. The relentless aggression is only effective because it is built upon a foundation of constant, subtle, and intelligent deception. The feints, the constant head movement, the intelligent footwork that cuts off the ring, the explosive combinations, these are not just a collection of individual physical techniques. When you layer them one on top of the other, when you execute them with relentless consistency, they combine to create something far more potent than the sum of their parts. They create an atmosphere. They generate a suffocating, claustrophobic aura of constant, overwhelming pressure. This pressure is the central pillar of the style's psychological warfare. and it is designed to break an opponent's mind long before their body finally gives out. This is the science of giving your opponent no room to breathe. To win a boxing match, a fighter needs the fundamental resources, space to operate and time to think. The entire peekaboo system is engineered to systematically deny them both. The ring-cutting footwork, as we've discussed, physically compresses the fighting space, turning the ring from an open field into a closet. This takes away the opponent's space. The constant, unpredictable head movement and the ceaseless stream of fights are designed to take away their time. The opponent is forced into a state of perpetual high alert, constantly reacting to threats. Both are ill and imagined. They have no moment of peace, no split second to reset and think about their own game plan. This forces them out of a proactive mindset and into a purely reactive one. A fighter who is in control is thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. They're setting traps, establishing their rhythm, executing a strategy. A fighter facing the peekaboo storm is thinking only about the next half second. Where is his head going now? Was that a real punch or a feint? How do I get away? Their own offensive game plan is completely forgotten, replaced by a primal, lizard brain instinct to simply survive the next onslaught. This state of constant reaction is profoundly exhausting, not just physically, but mentally. The human brain is not designed to operate under that level of sustained, high-stakes threat assessment. The mental fatigue leads directly to physical fatigue. Reaction times slow down. Defensive mistakes are made. The will to fight begins to erode. Perhaps the most potent psychological effect of the style is the dreadful sense of inevitability it creates. The opponent tries to hit the peekaboo fighter, but the head movement makes them miss. They try to tie them up, but they get punished in the clinch. They try to move away, but their path is relentlessly cut off. They are landing very few effective punches. Yet this armored, ever-advancing force never stops coming. It creates a feeling of utter helplessness, of hitting a granite wall that is, impossibly, walking you down. You can see this process unfold in the fight against the great Larry Holmes. Holmes was an ATG champion, a man with an iron will and one of the highest ring IQs in history. But as the rounds wore on, you can see the toll the pressure takes. He goes from the confident champion, trying to box and implement his strategy, to a man desperately trying to fend off the inevitable. He's bewildered. There are no answers. The system has presented him with a problem he cannot solve, and that tactical frustration is what ultimately leads to the physical breakdown. Now, a common take on this is that the pressure was all about intimidation, that opponents were simply scared of Mike Tyson the persona, with his black trunks, his intense stare, and his reputation. And while that was undoubtedly a factor, that view dismisses the science of the style itself. The counter-argument is that the intimidation was not the cause of the pressure. It was a symptom of the system's terrifying effectiveness. The fear an opponent felt was a logical, tactical response to the situation they found themselves in. They were afraid because they were facing a fighter who could not be hit cleanly, who could not be kept at bay, who closed distance with impunity, and who possessed devastating power in both hands. The fear was a product of the system's unsolvable equation. The peekaboo style itself is what was intimidating. The constant pressure wasn't just an attitude, it was the calculated, psychological endgame of a perfectly integrated fighting machine. That suffocating psychological pressure we just detailed, that feeling of inevitability and helplessness, it didn't just magically appear when the opening bell rang. It was a carefully orchestrated assault that began the moment a fighter signed the contract, and it reached a fever pitch in the moments just before the fight. The battle for an opponent's mind was launched long before the first punch was ever thrown. It started with the ring walk. It was amplified by the pre-fight rituals, and it was often won during the stare down. We need to analyze how these moments were not just boxing tradition, but a weaponized extension of the peekaboo philosophy itself. Let's start with the ring walk. Think about the pageantry you usually see with a heavyweight champion. Flashy, expensive robes, a massive entourage, music blasting. It's a celebration, a show. Now, picture a prime Mike Tyson. There was none of that. His ring walk was a masterpiece of menacing minimalism. He'd emerge from the tunnel wearing just his black trunks, black shoes, and famously no socks. Sometimes a simple white towel was draped over his shoulders. That's it. This image was a deliberate projection of pure, unadulterated purpose. It sent a clear message. I am not a showman. I am not an entertainer. I am a specialist who has come here to perform a specific, violent function. This stripped down, all business approach mirrored the philosophy of the peekaboo style itself. No wasted motion, No unnecessary flourishes, just brutal efficiency. He would often jog, almost sprint to the ring, a physical manifestation of the forward pressure that was to come. He was already closing the distance. Then, while waiting for the opening bell, he would pace his corner like a caged tiger. He was never still. He was a bundle of kinetic energy, visually representing the perpetual motion that was the hallmark of his style. He was already moving, already working, while his opponent stood still across the ring. But the culmination of this pre-fight assault was the stare. During the referee's final instructions, Tyson would lock eyes with his opponent. It wasn't a look of anger or hatred. It was a dead, empty, unblinking stare that seemed to look right through them. Cus D'Amato's philosophy on fear was central here. He taught that the hero and the coward feel the exact same fear. The only difference is what they do with it. The stare was a technique for projecting all of his own fear, all of his nervous energy, directly onto his opponent. It was a nonverbal declaration of intent, a profound and deeply unsettling moment that put the opponent on the psychological defensive. Before the fight had even begun, the absolute pinnacle of this weaponized intimidation was, once again, the pre-fight scene against Michael Spinks. It is a study in psychological collapse. Spinks, the recognized champion, is already in the ring. He looks confident enough. Then Tyson makes his walk. The arena is electric with a kind of dread. During the referee's instructions, the camera closes in on their faces. Tyson is locked on, burning a hole through Spinks with that cold, intense gaze. But look at Spinks. He cannot, or will not, return the stare. His eyes are darting down, to the side, anywhere, but at the man in front of him. His body language is screaming defeat. You can see in that moment that the battle of wills is already over. The physical contest that followed, all 91 seconds of it, was merely a formality. The war was won in that stare down. Now, the common cynical view is that this is all just theatrics. It's for the cameras, for the fans, for psyching yourself up. Many fighters have rituals, and it's often dismissed as having no real impact on the outcome. But in the D'Amato universe, there was no such thing as theatrics. Every single action had a purpose. The pre-fight rituals were a deliberate and crucial phase of the attack. Cus believed that boxing was 90% mental and that the fight was a contest of wills first and a contest of skills second. The minimalist attire, the aggressive walk, the relentless pacing, and the soul-piercing stare were the opening salvos in a contest of wills. They were designed to plant the seeds of doubt, to disrupt the opponent's mental equilibrium, and to establish a dynamic of predator and prey before a single glove was laid on them. It wasn't a show. It was the first, critical move of the fight. So let's recap the image we've built. You have a fighter with no robe, no socks, who sprints to the ring, stares a hole through his opponent, and then attacks with a relentless, suffocating, forward-moving pressure from the opening bell. The easy label, the simple, one-word description that has stuck to this style for decades is brawler. A wild, untamed, reckless street fighter who simply overwhelmed his opponents with raw, natural power and a furious disposition, and this, without a single doubt, is the greatest and most persistent misconception about the peekaboo style. So right now, we're going to draw a clear line in the sand. We are going to finally dismantle the myth of the brawler and distinguish between reckless aggression and the calculated, scientific aggression that lies at the heart of this system. First, let's define what a true brawler is in boxing terms. A brawler is often characterized by wide, looping punches, haymakers. Their defense is usually an afterthought. They rely on their chin and toughness to walk through punches to land their own. Their footwork is often clumsy, consisting of a straight-line forward charge. They engage in chaotic, 50-50 exchanges, hoping that their power and durability will be the deciding factor. It's a style born of aggression, but often lacking in deep technical substance. It is, by its nature, reckless. Now, hold that image in your mind and compare it to every single principle of the peekaboo system we have broken down over the last hour. They are polar opposites. The peekaboo style-esque aggression is only made possible because it is built on a foundation of supreme, almost paranoid, defense. A brawler gets hit. The peekaboo fighter, with their high guard, perpetual head movement, and constant slipping, is designed from the ground up to not get hit. A brawler throws wild, looping punches that waste energy and leave them exposed. The peekaboo fighter throws short, compact, biomechanically efficient punches that generate maximum power with minimum risk. A brawler charges forward, The peekaboo fighter uses intelligent, geometric footwork to cut off the ring and trap their opponent. A brawler swings with random fury. The peekaboo fighter uses a numbered system, fights, and a strategic plan to systematically break their opponent down from the body to the head. A perfect fight to see this contrast in action is the bout against James Bone Crusher Smith. Smith was a true brawler. He was a huge, physically strong man who came to the ring to do one thing: trade heavy leather and land a knockout punch. In that fight, you see Smith trying to do just that, throwing big, telegraph power shots. And what is Tyson doing in response? He is the scientist in the middle of a hurricane. His guard is tight. His head movement is constant and economical. His punches are short, accurate, and powerful. He refuses to engage in a wild, 50-50 slugfest. He is sticking to the system: slip, get inside, smother, work the body, create an opening, and punish it. That fight, while sometimes derided as ugly due to Smith's excessive clinching, is a perfect side-by-side comparison. It shows the stark, glaring difference between true brawling and the peekaboo's calculated, disciplined aggression. One is a gamble, the other is the methodical application of a proven formula. So why does the brawler myth persist? It's a classic case of looks being deceiving. The system is so hyper-aggressive, so fast, and so visually overwhelming that it looks like chaos to the untrained eye. When you see a fight end in 30 seconds with a man being violently knocked unconscious, your brain assumes the process that led to it must have been equally wild and uncontrolled. But it's an illusion. If you slow down the tape, if you dissect each movement as we have been doing, you see an almost robotic adherence to a set of scientific principles. The ferocity was real, but it was channeled through a rigid and highly disciplined framework. It was the furthest thing from a reckless street fight. It was a controlled demolition, with the emphasis squarely on controlled. Calling Mike Tyson a brawler is like calling a shark a mindless eating machine. It completely ignores the millions of years of evolutionary perfection that created such an efficient and deadly predator. So, if it's not mindless brawling, what is it? We've used the term calculated aggression, but perhaps there's an even more accurate and illuminating description. The ultimate, overarching goal of the peekaboo system is to achieve a state of absolute dictatorship within that 20 by 20 foot ring. And the primary instrument of that dictatorship, the tool used to bend the opponent to your will, is the complete and utter control of rhythm and tempo. Every fighter, consciously or not, has a preferred rhythm, a comfortable tempo at which they like to operate. Think of it as their favorite song to dance to. A slick, defensive outboxer wants a slow, steady waltz. They want to be able to glide around the floor, keeping their partner at arm's length, maintaining a predictable 1-3 beat with their jab. A powerful counter puncher wants a stop and start rhythm, luring their opponent into a pattern and then suddenly breaking it with an explosive shot. The peekaboo style's objective is to walk into that ballroom, smash the record player, and put on its own music at full volume. And that music is a relentless, high-tempo, frenetic punk rock track with no breaks and no chorus. The tempo of the peekaboo style is established from the first second. That constant, bobbing head movement provides the visual beat. The steady, shuffling forward advance of the feet is the drum line. The constant fights are the jarring guitar riffs. It creates a wall of sound, a relentless sensory input that never, ever stops. The entire point is to force your opponent to fight at your pace, a pace they are uncomfortable with, unprepared for, and unable to sustain. When you force a fighter to operate faster than their internal clock is set for, everything starts to break down. Their precise footwork becomes a clumsy scramble. Their crisp, snapping punches become arm-weary pushes. Their defensive discipline, so carefully honed in the gym, crumbles under the need to just react. It's a hostile takeover of the fight's rhythm. The constant forward pressure is key to this because it denies the opponent any chance to reset. In a typical boxing match, after an exchange, there's a beat. The fighters might take a half step back, take a breath, and reset the rhythm. The peekaboo practitioner does not allow this. The moment one exchange ends, they are already pressing forward, initiating the next. There is no pause in the music. This is mentally as devastating as it is physically. It forces the opponent into a state of oxygen debt, both literally and figuratively. They have no time to think, no time to breathe, no time to get back to their own game plan. A perfect example of this tempo, dictatorship, is the fight against Tony Tubbs. Tubbs was a skilled, slick, and accomplished heavyweight champion. He had pedigree. He wanted to fight a slow, technical boxing match where he could use his jab and footwork, Tyson, from the opening bell, gave him absolutely zero chance to do so. Watch the start of that fight. Tyson is on him, immediately setting a blistering pace. Tubbs is trying to get his jab going, trying to find his rhythm, but he can't. Tyson is perpetually in his face, slipping, feinting, and forcing Tubbs to move and react at a speed he is visibly struggling with. You can see the panic. He can't get his feet set. He's being musically drowned out, forced to fight Tyson's chaotic, close-range fight instead of his own. The result is a brutal second-round knockout, and while the final punches were powerful, the cause of the knockout was the complete tempo-based demolition that preceded it. This brings us to a counter-argument rooted in classic boxing wisdom: the fighter with the jab, and the footwork controls the tempo. The jab is the conductor's baton. It sets the pace and keeps the opponent at bay. In theory, a skilled-out boxer should be able to neutralize a pressured fighter, but the peekaboo system is built specifically to shatter this axiom. It strategically cedes control of distance for the first few seconds of an engagement in order to hijack control of the tempo. All those tools we've discussed, the head movement, the slips, the intelligent ring cutting, are designed to do one thing: neutralize the jab. And once the conductor's baton is broken, the orchestra descends into chaos. The peekaboo fighter steps in, takes over the podium, and begins to conduct their own brutal, high-speed symphony. For the past 20 dissections, we have meticulously assembled the peekaboo style, analyzing it as the seemingly perfect, almost mythological engine of destruction. We've broken down the impenetrable defense, the physics-defying power, and the suffocating psychological pressure. It can be easy to start thinking of it as an unbeatable system, but in boxing and in sports, there's no such thing as an unsolvable puzzle. No fighter is invincible. Every sword has a shield, every fortress has a weakness, and every great champion has an opponent who eventually figures them out. So now, we must flip the script. Let's put ourselves in the opposing corner. How do you fight it? How do you deconstruct this machine? What is the Achilles heel of the peekaboo style? To find the answer, we have to look at the blueprints written by the men who did the impossible. There is no single magic bullet. Defeating a prime peekaboo practitioner requires the near-perfect execution of a multi-layered, disciplined game plan. The first and most important element is an authoritative, educated jab, and I cannot stress the word authoritative enough. A soft, pawing jab is useless. It's a mild inconvenience that will be slipped and countered with ease. The jab must be a weapon, a hard, stiff, powerful punch that is thrown with bad intentions. Its purpose is not just to score points, but to stop the peekaboo fighter's forward momentum in their tracks. Because the head is always moving, the optimal target is often the chest, providing a stable, unmoving target that can halt their advance and disrupt their rhythm. Second is discipline, constant lateral movement. This is non-negotiable. If you retreat from a peekaboo fighter in a straight line, you are playing their game. You are allowing them to execute their geometric ring-cutting strategy. You will be herded to the ropes and demolished. You must use the entire ring, constantly circling, pivoting, and changing direction. The goal is to keep turning them, to force them to constantly reset their feet. This prevents them from getting set to throw their power combinations and disrupts the relentless forward flow of their pressure. Third, and this is a bitter pill to swallow, you must master the strategic clinch. When the fighter inevitably closes the distance and gets inside, you cannot try to fight their fight. You will lose that battle 9 times out of 10. You must tie them up, and this cannot be a desperate, fearful hug. It must be a hard, physical, strategic clinch. You use your size and weight to lean on them, to smother their offense, to make them carry your weight. This serves two purposes. It breaks their offensive rhythm and it drains their energy. The clinch becomes a weapon to sap the stamina of a fighter who relies on constant motion. The prime example, the blueprint that shocked the world, is the performance of James Buster Douglas in Tokyo. Forget everything else for a moment and just study the fight from a technical perspective. Douglas executed this game plan to absolute perfection. He refused to be intimidated. From the very first round, he established a long, hard, punishing jab that repeatedly snapped Tyson's head back. He used beautiful lateral movement, circling the ring, never allowing Tyson to pin him down for more than a few seconds. And when Tyson did manage to get in close, Douglas immediately initiated a strong clinch, using his superior size to bully Tyson and force a reset from the referee. It was a courageous, disciplined, and tactically brilliant performance. Evander Holyfield, years later, took that Douglas blueprint and added his own layer of indomitable will and physicality. He, too, used the jab, the movement, and the clinch. But he also met Tyson's aggression with his own, refusing to be pushed back, and possessed a legendary chin and the conditioning to weather the early storm. But the core principles were the same. Now, the common narrative, especially for the Douglas fight, is that Tyson beat himself, that he was undertrained, unfocused, and a shadow of his former self. And while those factors certainly played a role, attributing the loss solely to Tyson's shortcomings does a profound disservice to the men who beat him. It's the easy excuse. The reality is that the peekaboo system, even executed at 80% capacity, is a tactical nightmare. Buster Douglas didn't just win because Tyson had a bad night. He won because he and his team crafted a masterful strategy, and he had the courage and discipline to execute it under the most intense pressure imaginable. It wasn't just a loss for Tyson. It was a monumental victory for tactical genius and unbreakable spirit. We've just laid out the Herculean effort required to fight against the peekaboo style, the immense cardio, the strategic discipline, the sheer force of will needed to survive that relentless storm. But that naturally leads to an even more profound question. What on earth does it take to actually be the storm? The constant, bobbing motion, the explosive, full body power punches, the perpetual forward pressure, the unbroken defensive alertness, it all looks absolutely, inhumanly exhausting, and that's because it is. So now, we have to look under the hood. We need to examine the unseen, unglamorous, and brutal engine that powered this entire machine, a level of physical and mental conditioning that borders on the superhuman. The peekaboo style is arguably the most physically demanding style in all of boxing. It is not a style for the lazy or the undisciplined. Its conditioning requirements go far beyond the typical boxer's regimen. First, let's talk about cardiovascular endurance. Standard, long-distance road work is a good base, but it's not nearly enough. The peekaboo style is not a steady, aerobic marathon. It is a chaotic, 36-minute-long series of anaerobic sprints. You need the endurance to maintain the constant background motion, the head movement, the feinting, the shuffling footwork, while also possessing the explosive capacity to launch a devastating, full-power combination at any given second. This requires a level of conditioning that can only be built through relentless, high-intensity interval work. Then there's the muscular endurance, particularly in the legs and core. Holding that low, crouched peekaboo stance for 3 minutes, let alone 12 rounds, places an unbelievable strain on the quadriceps, glutes, and lower back. Powering the constant bobbing and weaving is a leg workout from hell. This is why a young Tyson's legs were like tree trunks. They had to be. They were the chassis and the suspension for the entire system. And a breakdown in that foundation would cause the whole structure to collapse. The stories of a young Mike Tyson's training regimen under Cus D'Amato and his team had become the stuff of legend. But they are worth repeating because they illustrate the price of admission for this style. His day would start with a 4 or 5 mile run at dawn. Throughout the day, he would perform a staggering amount of calisthenics, a routine that reportedly included 2,000 sit-ups, 500 push-ups, 500 dips, and 500 shrugs with a barbell. This wasn't about building beach muscles. This was about building the core strength for rotational power and the muscular endurance to repeat those violent motions again and again without fatigue. This was supplemented by hours of sparring hours on the heavy bag drilling, the numbered combinations, and of course his famous neck-bridging exercises, which were a functional necessity for stabilizing his head through the constant movement and absorbing the shock of any punches that got through. This directly counters a common perception of great athletes, especially power punchers like Tyson. The easy narrative is to attribute their success to being a natural or a genetic freak. People look at his incredible physique and his explosive power and assume he was simply born with it. And while his natural athletic gifts were obviously off the charts, that viewpoint completely ignores the sheer volume of work that was required to harness them. Those gifts would have been utterly useless within the peekaboo system, without the almost insane work ethic and the grueling, specific conditioning program that shaped them. There have been thousands of athletically gifted fighters who failed because they were not willing or able to subject themselves to this kind of brutal, monotonous, and painful work. The system is simply too demanding to be fueled by talent alone. In many ways, Tyson's greatest gift wasn't his power or his speed. It was his capacity, instilled in him by Cus, to embrace that punishing, relentless, and lonely grind. The conditioning wasn't just part of the style, it was its very foundation. That brutal, almost mythological level of conditioning is a huge part of the reason why we see so few true, dedicated peekaboo practitioners in the heavyweight division today. It is a style that demands a complete and total sacrifice of one's life to the craft, a level of discipline that is exceedingly rare. But while the full, unadulterated system is a collector's item, its ghost, its fundamental DNA, is everywhere you look in combat sports. To conclude our deep dive, we have to look at the lasting legacy of this brutal science and how its core principles have been adapted, evolved, and found new life not just in boxing, but in the modern cage of mixed martial arts. In modern heavyweight boxing, the classic peekaboo style faces new challenges. The era of the super heavyweight fighters like Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, and the Klitschko brothers before them, who stand 6'6" or taller with massive reach advantages, makes the simple act of closing distance a far more perilous journey than it was in Tyson's era. A disciplined jab and grab style from a giant can neutralize the head movement and make the infighting game a frustrating, clinch-heavy affair. However, the influence of the system's components is undeniable. You can see the echoes of its defensive genius in the slick upper body movement and counter-punching of a master like Canelo Alvarez. You can see its principles of intelligent pressure in the ring cutting of a relentless volume puncher like Naoya Inoue. The D'Amato philosophy on kinetic linking and torque generation is now fundamental to how power punching is taught worldwide. The system as a whole may be rare, but its parts have been absorbed into the very bloodstream of the sport. Perhaps its most exciting and unexpected legacy, however, is in the world of MMA. On the surface, it seems like a terrible fit. A style that involves constant bobbing and weaving would seem to be tailor-made for an opponent to time a devastating knee or a head kick, and yet, the principles have been brilliantly adapted. The low, coiled peekaboo stance, for instance, is remarkably similar to a wrestler's stance, making it a perfect hybrid platform for a fighter who wants to seamlessly blend striking with takedown defense. The constant head movement is arguably even more valuable in MMA, where the small 4-ounce gloves make it impossible to just hide behind a defensive shell. Evasion isn't just a good idea, it's a necessity for survival. Look at a fighter like former UFC bantamweight champion Cody Garbrandt. During his incredible title run, watch the way he fought Dominic Cruz. He employed a low stance, constant, fluid head movement, and an uncanny ability to slip punches and return fire with explosive, powerful hooks. It wasn't a carbon copy of Tyson's peekaboo. He had to modify it to defend against kicks and takedowns, but the spirit and the core principles were there in plain sight. He used the style as foundational ideas of evasion and explosive counter-punching to solve the puzzle of one of the most unorthodox and difficult-to-hit fighters in MMA history. This counters the common argument that traditional boxing styles are obsolete. In modern mixed martial arts, the critics will say a fighter bobbing and weaving is just asking to be knocked out by a kick, but this misses the point. It's not about a direct, one-to-one translation, it's about adaptation. The genius of the peekaboo system was never just the specific set of movements. It was the underlying scientific principles controlling distance, creating angles, evading on the center line, and generating power from the ground up. These are universal truths of combat, regardless of the rule set. The fighters who have successfully integrated these truths into their MMA game are a testament to the enduring, adaptable brilliance of Cus D'Amato's original blueprint. The style itself may be a relic of a bygone era, but its scientific soul continues to thrive in the most unexpected of places, a brutal and beautiful ghost in the modern machine of combat. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive. We've broken down the peekaboo style from its very foundation, the unorthodox stance, all the way up to its psychological and strategic brilliance. We've seen that what looks like a wild, reckless storm on the surface is, in fact, a highly disciplined, scientific system of combat. It's a style built on a bedrock of defense, where every slip and every bob is a trigger for a devastating, biomechanically perfect counterattack. From the torque of the swivel to the geometry of ring cutting, it's a masterclass in turning a shorter fighter's perceived disadvantage into overwhelming strengths. So the next time you watch those iconic, old-school knockouts, I want you to watch them with a new perspective. Don't just see the power, see the science. See the intricate dance of evasion and pressure that made the final, brutal knockout not just possible, but inevitable. The sweet science is at its most beautiful when it is at its most brutal, and the peekaboo style is perhaps the greatest testament to that truth. That's the final whistle for this episode Until next time, keep watching the game.